2023 is certainly not 2022 for TCU, but they hope to finish things off well, get themselves to a bowl game, some extra practices, and a winning record again here under Sonny Dykes. We got Melissa Treewasser on the line, Frogs Insider Podcast. They're at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Melissa, how you doing today?
Well, Mark, I talked to you a lot more last year around this time. And you never call, you never write, you don't text, it's been quite the change from 2023 to 2022, like you said, but a little sign of hope here over the last 6 quarters of football. So hoping TCU can finish strong and get to a bowl game at least.
That's right. They really aired it out in recent weeks, as you say, but specifically against Baylor. Josh Hoover with over 400 yards passing. Jared Wiley, a guy that we got familiar with during the stretch drive of 2022, had a nice game as well. Is there going to be some balance in Norman on the offensive side for the Frogs, or are they going to just continue to sling it?
Well, I think that Kendall Briles has shown that given the opportunity, he is going to air it out and just throw the ball around. He has a ton of faith in Josh Hoover. We saw that, in his first career start against Baylor or against BYU, he threw the ball 50 plus times. And so there was no worries from, day one about this kid being able to handle the load. And I would expect a pass heavy attack, not because TCU doesn't have a ton of faith and confidence in Amani Bailey, who also had a really nice game against Baylor and has quietly put together a really impressive season. But the offensive line has not been able to run block for anything really, and that's kind of where TCU struggles in 2023 have started. It's just in the ability to set the edge, block up the middle, spring a guy like Amani Bailey, who isn't necessarily known for his patience in the backfield, but develop holes for him to spring loose. The dude in the open field is fast and he's hard to tackle. There just hasn't been a lot of open field opportunities for him. So yeah, I think that's where you'll see TCU really try to attack the Sooners on Friday to the level of success. We'll see. The Hoovers look great against teams like BYU and Baylor, which aren't exactly good defensive units. He looked great in the second half against Texas as well, though a Texas team that had kind of taken its foot off the gas. So this will be a big test for him in a high pressure situation.
Melissa, when you put together, again, still the hopes of salvaging a winning season and then, of course, getting to a bowl game, which, certain people put in various categories these days in regards to the importance of a bowl game, but it's still almost like, did you make a bowl game? You didn't make a bowl game, really? Kind of thing. So there's a perception there about bowl teams versus non-bowl teams. And certainly the practice time for the young players to move into 2024. So there has to be some significance to this game on those levels.
Oh, absolutely. Look, first and foremost, you can't play in the national championship game less than a year ago and not make a bowl game the next year. That hasn't happened very often historically, and TCU currently could be on pace to be the worst team following a season in which they appear in the national championship. And you have to think for Sonny Dykes too, not that his resume is on the line here, but when you look at the last 12 games of his career at TCU, the results have not been positive. Not a lot of wins over plus 500 teams, and not a lot of confidence in how his team has performed. So this is a big opportunity for him. It's huge for recruiting. I think TCU fans have been disappointed with either the lack of high-level recruiting or the lack of news coming out about high-level recruiting. Coming off of that national championship run a season ago, I think we thought there'd be a little bit more juice. And so if you fall flat, that becomes a lot of negative recruiting in an era that's going to be hugely important when you look ahead at the teams that you're going to be up against on the recruiting trail, not just in the Big 12, but with Texas and Oklahoma getting that SEC bump as well. They already were the elite recruiting universities. They're going to have even a little bit more juice. So this is a really important time for TCU. Making a bowl game and getting to 6-6 is not going to make or break the future of Sonny Dykes' Fort Worth tenure, but it would be anything certainly disappointing to not at least have the opportunity to get those 15 extra practices and have a winning season the year after that magical run.
Melissa, I got to say, it struck me kind of odd when I looked at the Big 12 schedule during the off season when it was revealed, because the Big 12, like the other conferences, have typically taken this as rivalry week. And I'm seeing nothing there. It just looks like somebody just through the games at a calendar to say this isn't necessarily going to be the week that Oklahoma State play Bedlam, and on down the line, Kansas State, of course, played last weekend. TCU, Texas, maybe Texas Tech. That's about the only angle I can find there. But is there any, with Oklahoma moving on to the SEC, any angst there, any pride there from TCU fans in regards to let's send them off and kick them out the door to the SEC?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think you saw a lot of extra juice around the Texas game, a team that TCU has frankly dominated since joining the Big 12. That was just TCU's third loss since 2012 against the Longhorns. And if you watched them in that second half, you saw how much that game meant to the players and the coaching staffs. TCU has not won in Norman since 2005, which is kind of an insane thing to say when you think about some of the teams that TCU has fielded in the new era of the Big 12. They got a little bit lucky, that they had Oklahoma at home in 2014 in that magical season. But one of their, I think, only 3 losses in 2015 was in Norman on a failed 2-point conversion that I'll forever never forget the fingernail of that Oklahoma defensive back just to get a tip on a ball that would have been completed. So this one does mean something. That the odds of TCU playing in Norman again are very, very slim. And so when you go to a place you haven't been able to play, when you have an opportunity to make a bowl game and an opportunity to keep Oklahoma out of the Big 12 championship so that you don't end up with a Texas-Oklahoma Big 12 championship in those two teams' final year. I think that this one does mean a lot to TCU players. I think it means a lot to the TCU fan base. And certainly there's a lot on the line for the Sooners as well. So I think you'll see a competitive game if we see the same version of TCU that we've seen for the last 6 quarters, where they're finally looking a little bit invested and engaged. And as Josh Newton said on Monday, playing unselfishly for the first time this season, then I think they can play with an Oklahoma team that showed a few cracks here and there and might be without their starting quarterback.
Melissa, you mentioned the record in the last 12 games. Is there a thought that there's concern about this stretch? There was obviously an understanding that this season wasn't going to be last season. So this was anticipated to a degree. So is there just a thought that, okay, we knew that there would be a step back. Everything's still going in the right direction. This is just one of those transition seasons, or is there legitimate concern?
I mean, I think it can be both. Jamie Plunkett, my co-host on the Frogs Insider podcast, and I spoke about this on our podcast this week. You can find that in Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, of course, under the Republic of Football Network and Dave Campbell's Texas Football. That is such a mouthful to get out. But I mean, I think one of the things that the fan base is why there is such kind of a negative reaction to this season. We all knew who we were losing, right? You lose a Max Duggan, who is a generational quarterback. You lose a Quentin Johnson, who's a first-round draft pick. We won't talk about what happened Sunday. Everybody's seen that drop. You lose Kendre Miller and Amari DeMarcado, both guys who are getting snaps in the NFL at running back. You lose Steve Avila, a second-round guard who is starting for the LA Rams. I mean, there were Trey Tomlinson, who was the Thorpe Award winner. I mean, there were key guys that left, 8 guys that got drafted. So you knew there was going to be a step back. But I think the issue comes in with how much we were sold during spring ball and into fall camp. We were told that this was the most physically impressive team that Sonny Dykes has ever seen. We were told this was one of the 3 most talented teams that he's ever coached. The stuff coming out of fall camp wasn't, hey, we're going to take a big step back. It was like, this team is ready to compete. But Jamie brought up a really good point in that, of course, this is one of the 3 most talented teams that Sonny Dykes has ever been around. He's been at Louisiana Tech. He's been at Cal, which was an absolute dumpster fire of a football program before he got there and after he left. And he's been at SMU, where he certainly didn't have the ability to recruit at the level that TCU has had. And so even TCU, coming off of kind of 4 down years of recruiting, still had more talent in the barn, and he recruited a really high level when he arrived on scene. So maybe the verbiage, maybe the semantics of how he presented his expectations going into this season, that's something he might learn from. Gary Patterson used to always talk about on paper and paper tigers, and Sonny Dykes wanted to sell us those paper tigers really, really hard and capitalize on the momentum that he had. But when you build high expectations and you fall short, people tend to get distrustful, and people start bringing up that November record Sonny Dykes has had over the course of his career, and what a negative that's been. So he's going to have some rebuilding to do, not just in the program, but amongst the fan base and the donor base as well. This should have been a home run season I think 8 wins and people would have been completely and totally bought in, no problem whatsoever. But the way that they've lost some of these games, the way that they lost to Colorado, the way that they lost to Iowa State and West Virginia, where they just didn't look interested in competing at a high level. That I think has caused some questions, and also all the capital that he spent and all the goodwill he spent to bring in somebody with the Briles last name. You can't do that and spend all that goodwill and then go, 5-7, which is a realistic possibility for this program. So I don't think that people are going to be calling for his job. I'll be interested to see if he makes any staff changes or if some people elect to move on. But he's not going to get this grace twice in a row. I think people will kind of wipe it away and say, okay, we're going to give him one more chance, but he's going to have to show marked improvement and more buy-in, I think, in 2024 before people start to get a little bit antsy.
Melissa Triebwasser, Frogs Insider Podcast. And Melissa, for anyone who missed it when you ripped through it the first time, we want to make sure that everyone knows where to find you.
Yeah, you can find me at the Coach Melissa on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. You can find Frogs Insider on Apple, Spotify, under the Frogs Insider podcast, or the Republic of Football Network, part of Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Wherever you listen to podcasts, that's where it is. We talk a lot of TCU football, obviously. TCU basketball, both men's and women's teams started 5-0 for the first time in TCU history. So we're super, super excited about what's going on in those programs. And I will say nobody covers baseball better than the Frogs Insider podcast when that season kicks up.
Awesome. Melissa, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for dropping by. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you as well. Hopefully we'll have a bowl game to preview with you. We'll see. Fingers crossed, right?
Let's do that.